Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining us, everyone. It's so cool to put a call out and then have everyone respond. This is amazing. So thanks for being here today. This is a webinar about putting privacy into practice, applying the tools and resources of the DLF Privacy and Ethics in Technology Working Group. I'm one of the current co-conveners of this working group, along with Michelle Gibault. Okay, so this is where we're headed today. I'll do a very brief introductions and overview of today's session. And then we're going to have a panel of co-presenters talking about the resources and materials that our working group has produced over the last few years, with the idea that we can help you apply it yourself. And then we'll have an open Q&A and discussion, just to field questions and see what everyone's doing and ideas about the resources. So again, this is the DLF Privacy and Ethics in Technology Working Group. This is the URL to our wiki page, where we have information about our group history, the work that we do, our vision and our values. These slides will be shared along with this webinar video, so you can check that out later as well. So the point of today's webinar is to help our community apply the materials of our working group to address and improve privacy in your local context. So that's what we're aiming to do today. And additionally, to build a community of practice for the working group. So if you'd like to get involved or have ideas about collaborations, please talk to me or Michelle or any of the co-presenters today. This session will be recorded and uploaded to the YouTube channel, the DLF YouTube channel, so you can check that out later. Share it with your friends. So today's co-presenters. I'm Scott Young, User Experience and Assessment Librarian at Montana State, co-convener of the working group, Michelle Gibault, Scholarly Engagement Librarian at Tulane. And then going around our co-presenters today, Yasmeen Shorish, Margaret Paige Walker, Mark Ockerbloom, and Dorothea Salo. And they'll each have an opportunity to introduce themselves as we go around, talking about the resources. So we have an advocacy action plan, a digital privacy instruction curriculum, data risk assessment, vendor privacy policy analysis, and then ethics in research use of library patron data, a glossary, and an explainer. So these are the materials that we'll be covering today. And we will start with Yasmeen.
Hi, good afternoon on the East Coast. I hope everyone can hear me all right. I am not going to be sharing any slides because I'm going to make it short and sweet. To begin with, I would like to thank Scott and Michelle for the invitation to speak a little bit about the working group's origin story, basically, how we came to be and some of what we're thinking about for the future. So in brief, for those of you who maybe this is your first exposure to this DLF working group, this working group was formed in 2017, based in part on conversations that I was having with Shay Swagger, the other co-founder and inaugural co-convener at the RDAP Summits. The RDAP Summit is the Research Data Access and Preservation Summit. And we were talking about how pervasive intrusive technologies had become in higher education and in libraries in general. And we had the idea to spin up this working group at DLF of that year to be a place where people could bring their questions and their expertise together, but really critically where we could produce tangible outcomes for the community to engage with, to use, that this would be a very working group, but to an end where people felt like the work was valuable and actionable and something that was relevant to a variety of contexts. I'm looking at notes so I don't forget, sorry. So at that time, we took the name Technologies of Surveillance. So this was the the original name of the working group was the Technologies of Surveillance Working Group. We took that from prior writings for the DLF director at the time, Bethany Novisky, where she was talking a lot about the co-evolution of technology and surveillance cultures. And then we invited people to tell us how to help focus this work and do that via subgroups, because working groups are meant to be vibrant and dynamic, and this is a really big topic. So privacy and ethics, or technologies of surveillance at the time, we knew that we needed smaller working groups or subgroups to focus on directed outcomes. And that we wanted it also to be flexible, so that as new issues maybe arose, or we felt like we had really concluded work in one area, we could sort of spin up and down subgroups nimbly. So this topic clearly is going to be with us for some time. And I think a lot of our privacy and ethics in technology concerns are ever more pressing and urgent. So part of this evolution is seen in the name of the working group. So the name was changed to be more explicit in reference to the goals, right? To really look at privacy and ethics in technology, and maybe be a little less, meta about technologies of surveillance. We also have staggered rotating co-convener roles. That model helps to ensure that we have new ideas and perspectives coming into the group, and really are meant to help us both avoid tunnel vision and also getting too myopic about one type of service model or one type of library context, and that we can have a really varied view of the landscape, so that the products that we produce have as much versatility and are as applicable as possible to as many contexts as possible. Because it's privacy and ethics are, should be ubiquitous across everything that we do, but the implementation of privacy first principles and the ways that those look are going to vary by the systems that are being used and the context that they're in place with. So that is, I think, in time to give you the origin story of the working group, and to invite you to learn more about the different subgroups that they're going to talk about today, and the products that have been produced by just fantastic, fantastic people. So thanks. I can't remember who's going next. I'm sorry. Michelle, you'll have to tell me.
I think it might be me. Hi, everybody. My name is Michelle Jabot. It's really nice of you all to come out. It looks like right now we're over 100 people. So thank you so much for coming. Yasmeen said a few things that I really would like to highlight real quick one more time. The first thing is that she's use of the word intrusive, I think is pretty helpful, because we can imagine that word being about, sort of personal intrusion, but then also sort of scaling up to sort of thinking about, sort of collective goods, which as we start to shift gears and think about the advocacy plan, I think that is really the thing I learned the most. And before I go into what exactly the advocacy plan looks like and where you can find it and all of that, I'll just spend a few minutes, first of all, saying that if I go off camera, it will be because I sometimes have bandwidth issues. As we know, the access to broadband has been a huge thing for a long time, and I think right now we're really starting to feel that. So if I go off camera, it'll be because somebody has let me know that I'm cutting out. So the first thing I'd like to do is just let you know how I got involved. I was in a role where part of my job was to actually be producing research and to be thinking about libraries broadly and thinking about what kinds of things as a profession we really need. And to me, I think that I do a lot of instruction work, and I think that one of the ways to really make the value of libraries felt by people who may be just using their first library catalog or website is to ask them, sort of what is the difference between results if you Google something, what happens? Do you and your neighbor get the same results? And that question leads to all kinds of different discussions, usually having to do with the fact that libraries are not necessarily that interested in holding on to data about what you search for and why that might be. So that's how I kind of came into this, but then also after spending a little bit of time thinking about why I'm so passionate about it, I came to this work as an artist and with an interest in the way that creativity and privacy are closely linked. And I didn't really realize that. I knew that I'd gone to library school because I was really interested in sort of the underlying freedoms that libraries represent. But it took me a long time to actually realize why I was involved. So one of the things you might do if you get involved in the advocacy subgroup is really do some deep dives into your own ways of thinking about why this work matters to you. So we began after Yasmeen and Shay put out the call, we divided into subgroups, and the advocacy subgroup came about, and we didn't really have a leader. I said that I was willing to help, and without really knowing what that would entail, really it meant just a lot of booking meetings. And then faced with the first question, without even really knowing what the advocacy subgroup was yet, we had to come to the crossroads of how we were going to communicate. And that wasn't a great first problem to be saddled with, because obviously, you need to confront the Google question right away. So we originally worked with, trying to use a lot of different really great non-Google technologies, but then ultimately came to the decision that, using the Google Suite, Google Drive was really the only way we were going to be able to get much accomplished. And that took some time. That took some kind of flapping around. And if I were to look back at, sort of the progress that we made, I would say don't give up. A lot of times when you're beginning this kind of work, you're going to be faced with maybe the hardest questions, and then the smaller and easier questions come after that. So now I think what we'll do, if so that I don't run out of time, is to just spend a second looking at this document. So I'm going to share my screen and just give you, it's not a long document. We put a lot of effort into it, and you'll see once I share my screen, I hope that you'll see, does everyone see it? Nod your head, Margaret. Do you see it? Okay, wonderful. You'll see that a bunch of different people contributed, including Eliza, Mariah, Yasmeen herself, and then Paige Walker, whom you'll hear from shortly. The way that we began and this introduction, if you skip introductions.
Wow, this is really not the way to do a Zoom webinar.
Oh, okay. Thanks for that feedback. So if you normally skip introductions, I would suggest that you actually look at this if you're having a difficult time sort of articulating who you're trying to convince, who are you trying to persuade? Because a lot of times the battle about personal privacy is not really where you want to go, maybe. Perhaps collective, thinking about things collectively is where you kind of want to begin. And you'll see in this final sentence, in short, the benefit to society of a right to privacy is much greater than the benefit to any one individual. I think that really sort of pulls together what we're trying to get. But then there's a question of like, well, what environment are you in? What is your context, and who are you trying to persuade? Because a lot of times you're not really dealing with, you're not really dealing with an authoritarian or, somebody who's trying to take your freedoms away. Very often you're trying to persuade somebody who just wants to do things simply so that they won't fail, which I think is a pretty good cause, actually. So you're trying to persuade somebody who maybe even has the best interests of an institution, whatever that institution is, and not necessarily somebody who just wants to take away your freedoms. So focusing on the fact that you're truly interested in sort of the collective value of privacy might be a useful beginning to whatever you're trying to advocate for. So what the next thing I focus on is the fact that we pulled together a few ethical frameworks, and these are links that are available within the document. And I think for the most part, you may already know of things like the ALA Code of Ethics, but there are also things from international perspectives that might be useful if you're trying to pull together sort of the beginning of an approach to an institutional framework for yourself. Now might be a good moment to talk about the fact that public and academic libraries represent a real difference in context. And one of the things that was difficult for us right away was the fact that we wanted to make sure that we were helping academic libraries and public libraries as much as we could with the real structural problem of not having any public librarians available to be on our advocacy working group. As you know, public librarians don't necessarily have the time built into their job structures to be able to be spending a lot of time building, action plans for advocacy. So we did our best, and I at the time was doing civic work for the city of Fayetteville, Arkansas, which is where I lived at this time. So I was able to sort of talk to librarians a little bit in our public library about how they think about these questions, but that was the extent to which we had a lot of public library involvement. So we did a lot of sort of thinking about these issues in terms of imagination and trying to be compassionate towards public library perspectives. The thing that I generally send this to, the way this gets the most use from my desk is by saying there are links to a variety of resources that you can definitely use immediately. And a lot of that has to do with the data doubles work that is ongoing, and that's linked here. And then as well, the work that was done at Montana State about responsible web analytics for library websites. This is resources right away that can help you use Google Analytics in a way that is easy to implement, right now at this moment. So if there's a number one resource that I think that I used from this document, it would be this. So the final thing to point out is that there's a real legal issue when it comes to privacy, and that has to do with the question of consent. Because a lot of people say, well, that's in our privacy policy, or if you're an employee of this organization, you've already signed away your right to, not have your facial recognition data shared, for example, or something like that. And so one of the things that is, I think, starting to come alive is this idea that, clicking a I consent or a terms of use is not necessarily consent itself. And I think that those kinds of discussions are happening in the law community quite a bit. One of the things that may emerge more is this idea of a privacy nutrition label, which you'll see there's a link to datalabel.org, which basically shares information about, sort of what you might be sharing, and also hopefully what is not being included in the data that you share. So in general, that's it. It went into a little bit of speculative places with biometric data. As you know, libraries are, sort of starting to pull in cameras that might be doing things that some librarians might be uncomfortable with, but there isn't a lot of detailed information there. So I think now we're moving on to the next speaker, but I'm happy to answer any questions that came up. So thank you so much.
All right, so now it's my turn. Excuse me, I'm Paige Walker. I'm the Digital Collections and Preservation Librarian at Boston College. Much like Michelle, I joined the DLF Technologies of Surveillance Working Group just out of a sheer interest of it, and because the Instruction and Outreach Committee, or subgroup rather, didn't have a leader, I stepped up to co-lead it with, my screen's not it, with Peter Fernandez from the University of Tennessee. And We worked together for a little under 2 years with a slew of really marvelous members to produce what we then came to call the Digital Privacy Instruction Curriculum, and that's what I'll be talking about today. So, similar to Michelle's group, before we decided to produce anything, we wanted to do a bit of a literature review, and we took a deep dive into some of the really wonderful resources about digital privacy that exist already, especially things produced by the Library Freedom Project, Brooklyn Public Library's Data Privacy Project, the Electronic Frontier Foundation's guide, and the American Library Association's various efforts to address privacy. And one of the things we noticed with all of those resources was there was an emphasis on digital security and privacy that was often intimidating to members of our community who didn't really even know where to start. And that's just some personal things that we shared in our community at this subgroup about things we've noticed with a lack of uptake of these resources in our own libraries. So in order to kind of flip that without reinventing the wheel and acknowledging all of the really wonderful efforts that these groups have done, we decided to create, there we go, the Digital Privacy Instruction Curriculum that we presented at the DLF Forum as a crypto party. And there are chats coming up here. Sure. And, oh, sorry, trying to do Zoom with chat. So you can find these resources, oh my God, at this OSF site, which is osf.io/SEBHF. And once it loads, you'll see here that we've arranged things by scenarios and also by tools, with the idea that users and attendees would come to a crypto party or related session, choose a scenario that best fits their use case. And say, for instance, if someone wanted to figure out how they could do online dating in a more technologically savvy manner, they could open this guide and read stories from the news that situate online dating and digital privacy in a really relatable manner, kind of get a better grip on what their risks and threat model might be, figure out how they can reduce their risks, and identify tools, particular tools that could help with this risk reduction. Then they could also see a list of privacy resources that they could look to for more in-depth insight into this scenario. So this works in tandem with this set of tools we created, which, for instance, this online dating page says encrypted Wi-Fi VPNs, so they could go to the Managing Internet Flow tool that Eliza Bettinger at Cornell University created herself, and then get a good overview of how the internet flow works from a back-end perspective, how to secure their internet flow with VPNs and Tor and HTTPS, things like that, and figure out what works best for them and what doesn't. So that in a nutshell is what we did. The few scenarios we created were border crossing, online dating, online shopping, organizing movements, and vulnerable research studies. And the tools we expanded upon were browser extensions, default settings, managing internet flow, password managers, and secure messaging. So we're hopeful that with these sort of mix and match guides,
library workers around the world, around the US especially, can create different workshops that better fit the needs of their own patrons. So with that, I'll pass it on to John.
Thank you. Yes, I'm John Mark Ockerbloom. I'm just going to take a moment now to share my screen. And hopefully there we go. Just a moment. There we are. So I was in the Library Built Systems subgroup as somebody at the University of Pennsylvania Libraries. I was in this group with a number of other people. Shay's already been mentioned. Christine Briney and Becky Yos are three other people that have been working on our guide that we're producing. And there have also been a number of other people in the early discussions which had some useful inputs into the work that we did. What we're really trying to do is give practical advice to libraries on how to protect their users from unwanted use of their personal information. Now, all of us in libraries collect some degree of personal information just to do library business, but we want to understand how to best to protect that and how to prioritize and assess risk for our users about the personal information about themselves or information about what they're reading and doing. We're focusing on libraries that build or maintain their own systems that use personal data. Now, some of us are actually construct software that does that, like large libraries like us. So that was one of our core use cases. But there are also many other libraries that have their own systems. Some libraries, for instance, use software that's been developed by the community. And even more libraries might buy software, but still have control over the data in the larger system. So an application, for instance, might create a file that then gets used by other applications or that gets used in reporting, for example. And librarians might still have control over, say, what goes into logs for reporting, or they might have a policy to delete logs on a periodic basis or not. It's also worth remembering that lots of libraries have low-tech systems for collecting data. So a library might have paper forms for things like signing up for library cards or for signing into meetings. And those libraries have control over what personal information gets asked for on those forms and over what happens to that information after you fill it out. So for example, one of our local public libraries asks for things like exact date of birth and gender, and we're sort of going, well, actually, do you really need that for that purpose? And what risks get associated with that? Our subgroup convened a couple of years ago, and what we decided to do fairly soon was basically, the best thing to do was basically to try to produce a guide as practical as we could, and as I say, assessing risk for your library patrons, your library users on the systems that you use. We actually produced a draft for that that went out for public comment in 2019, and a number of you in this session actually provided some really useful comments, and thank you very much for that. We went back to that, and then we all got busy, and things like the pandemic happened, and so on. But three of us are now going through that document now with the comments, and we're hoping to post it in our Open Science Framework area next month. We're doing weekly reviews and revisions of this. So let me talk about what's in it. And thank you again, as I say, for the many comments that help make it better. So our guide comes in a few parts. First, there's a part that describes the more common sorts of personally identifiable information that exists in library-built systems. That's both, as I say, who you are, what you do, and so on. There's a section then involving some of the more common threats involving that data, it describes that. And that's followed by a section talking about some general ways to reduce the likelihood or the severity of those threats. And they include advice like minimize the data you collect or disclose and get meaningful consent, not just buried in a privacy policy for the data you do collect. And make sure you only use the data for the purposes you disclose and destroy it once you no longer need it. There was also a general sense that we actually got from one of the comments saying it was also very important that libraries establish explicit policies and documentation for what gets done with the data that includes personally identifiable information. That's one of the new bits we're adding to the document, and thank you again for that feedback. We also talk some about prioritization and trade-offs and the challenges of changing an existing system you might have versus designing a system for privacy from the ground up. We follow that with a section that lays out how to do a patron data inventory, which is a very important tool for assessing risk. Basically, what you do in a patron data inventory is you, first of all, list all the systems you have that deal with some sort of personally identifiable information. And we have a list of systems that you should consider whether you have or not and what they have. And then we have a set of questions that you should ask about each of those systems. And using the answers to those questions, you can then decide what risks you have in your systems and prioritize and come up with a strategy to mitigate those risks. Some of us have actually done risk assessments like this in our libraries. We found it quite useful. In the Penn libraries, for example, we did a data census a while ago, and actually one of the things that flagged was a system that I built, a simple system to handle online book requests. And after we did the risk assessment, we realized that, well, it could be more secure. For instance, I wasn't using HTTPS, and I didn't have a plan to actually delete the data after I'd logged it, and didn't have a good way of managing email that was related to that might also have personal information. So all of that was helpful for me then to change the system, and that both protects my users, and it's also a bit of incentive because I know we're going to do another one of these, and I can give better answers hopefully next time when we run that data inventory. As I said, we hope to have the document. It's not out yet, but we did have the earlier draft, which we're doing hopefully final revisions for. So we hopefully by next month, we will have the draft release. It will be in our OSF area. It'll be under a CC BY license, which I think some of the other group documents might also be. But the idea on that is that it should allow wide both distribution and adapting it for your own local purposes. And we hope that going forward, the community, and I'm again so grateful that so many of you are in this session, can continue giving feedback after you've actually tried using the assessment on its usefulness and revise and update it as important. So as I say, this is the title of our guide. It should be coming out next month. Our working group area, we'll have it posted in other places well. And I can't speak for the other people in the group, but I'm very happy to talk to other people who are interested in this area, and here are some places to reach me. And thank you very much.
Okay, I think I am up next. I am Margaret Heller. I'm Digital Services Librarian at Loyola University Chicago, and I will be representing the work of the Vendor-Built Systems Group. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides for that. Start this slideshow. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, so I have a little spring theme going on here because I think we all need this. So this had a lot of people involved in this group, and a lot of people have been the convener of this group. I would say it's a little bit of a baton relay race from convener to convener, and I was sort of the last one left. And I think that we found that we're sort of ready to bring this work to an end with the document that I'll show you a preview of. And but I think there's a lot of people on this call who I know are doing this work, and so the work is continuing. So I'm just going to give an overview of what we have and invite comments. I think what's really important to realize in this work, though, is that all of this is holistic. So it all starts with the advocacy that Michelle was talking about. It's instructing everyone in your library and your patrons about what all of this means. It's looking at your own systems. This is all part of a whole effort. So while we work a lot with vendors, there's a lot of pieces that go into this. So let me go ahead and get into this a little bit. So let's talk about the context for this work. We are generally in libraries reliant on vendors of one type or another, whether it's for our articles, our our library services platform, ILS, what have you. Even libraries who have lots of developers are always using other third-party vendors. And so we kind of have to learn to live with what the privacy policies of our vendors are. But I would say what we sort of realize in doing this research or talking to people is that there's a little bit of ignorance and confusion on both sides. So the more we understand where the limits are of what is being promised and what can actually be delivered, we can ask for more and we can sort of enforce it in some way. But I think until we understand what it is that they're actually telling us and what that actually means, and what our own as John was mentioning, what our own systems are collecting, how we're dealing with the data ourselves, we can then sort of see where, who's responsible for which piece of it. And I think that when we're coming up with this work, we decided that really what we wanted to start with was reading lots and lots of vendor privacy policies to see what's kind of normal and what requires more questions. Now, I personally don't do any licensing for electronic resources. A number of people who participated in the work do that work and are used to reading these policies and used to reading licenses. So they, provided some helpful feedback on this. So for me, a lot of it was reading a lot of stuff and trying to, come up with some more context for what I was seeing. So I will, I think we tried to do a little bit of analysis where we went through everything and we thought, well, we can, figure out every piece of it. But in fact, there's not, there's a lot that goes into here. And so it's something that probably you're going to have to go through with your own vendors. So let me go here. I'll give you a little bit of a sense of this report. So this URL here, whoops, let me go back to it. I'll open this up. So I'm going to put this, that URL from the slides, I'm going to put in the chat as soon as I'm done talking. And this will send it out more widely too. So this is a still kind of rough version of a document that is trying to describe the work that the group did. And so this particular document, mostly the authors were, I wrote it, and then Scarlett Galvin also wrote quite a bit of it. And then there's, I think all the participants who did much of the analysis, so I'm sure there's a few people that may have dropped in from time to time, but these are sort of the main people that had comments in the document and who came to meetings over the years. And we did this work for a long time, so there's a lot of people who participated over the years.
Margaret,
so,
can you switch your application sharing?
Oh yes, I'm sorry.
Thanks. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. I keep doing that in I keep trying to be secure by only sharing the one application, and then I forget to switch it. So, okay, so here is the document I was mentioning, and here's the people who participated, and then so we go through a little bit of the background here and how long we've been working on this, and basically it's 2 years ago is when this work started. And then what we did is we looked at, we ended up choosing 8 vendors. We looked at a lot more of them, but this was sort of what we ended up with in looking at this analysis. And just so they represented things like library services platforms, journal platforms, content aggregators, open access journals, a few sort of more scientifically oriented products. And this is just, I would say this is a pretty broad overview. It's not going into any amount of detail, but I can, I'll just point out a few things here. But we then took the ALA privacy guidelines for creating a library privacy policy. So we said, like, well, if a library should have this in their privacy policy, should a vendor have those same items? So we looked to see, and I would say in general, vendors do have these things in their privacy policies. However, they're a little bit different. I think the major thing I want to call out here, and this is probably obvious to people, but it wasn't. I think it was important for me to realize. So the government request for library records, we sometimes think about in the sense of, like, what happens when we get a subpoena that we need to provide a patron's records and we're not allowed to mention we got that subpoena. The ways that we could accomplish that, whether it's there's lots of ways that we can do that. So, like, one thing is not keeping patron circulation records is an example of something, a choice we can make to avoid that situation. And a lot of the vendor privacy policies were more along the lines of basically we have a wide latitude to share any data that we need to pretty much any third-party contractors, and or any kind of legal request. So like, I mean, it could be a government request, but it could be declaring bankruptcy or some other kind of legal proceeding that that they were sharing some kind of patron information. And they don't. Some of them do say that they will provide some notice on that, but not all of them. So I think that was sort of the one thing that jumped out to me. Almost all of them have almost the same boilerplate language, so it sort of suggests that that there's a sort of legal clause that everyone is kind of using the same thing. I think that the other piece that is important to think about here, and I'm going to actually, I'll go back to, well, I'll just scroll through the rest of this and then go back to my other slide. I just want to show a couple other things on here. There's a sort of key issue in here that libraries need to understand which data is in their control and which data is in the vendor control, and where those connection points occur, how you can make those more secure. So for example, there are authentication systems that include a lot of patron data. I mean, oftentimes it's if depending on how your proxy server set up or other systems set up, you could have the exact person, exactly what resource they got at exactly what time, and you've got a log of that, and that is really, really sensitive data. And in understanding how you set up your proxy server or how you set up other authentication, that is sort of your moment to ensure that you're protecting people and not providing more information about them than is strictly necessary. So for, like if you need to say, are they authenticated or not, and there can be more passed along that you're not intending to do. So that it's very important to make sure that you understand how your systems are set up and how they work, and then you can be more of an active partner in that. There's also things like if you provide your patron data in a patron feed to your library services platform, that the vendor shouldn't necessarily be accessing any of that data. They shouldn't be accessing that data unless they specifically need to and give you notification. But the responsibility of getting the data securely from your servers to your library services platform, that's your responsibility, and you need to do that in a secure manner. Okay, I'm going to go back to my slides. Okay, so what I've just said is this is open till the end for comments till the end of May, and then we're going to do a similar thing to other groups. We'll just put it up on our OSF space and call it a day on that report, since it is. I think we've all the work has sort of moved on in various ways. So let me just give a quick overview here about some things that we discovered that are kind of useful things to do. If you kind of do nothing else, these are and some of these are pretty big, but these are my suggestions for what to take away. So make sure that you are reviewing and asking questions about third-party access. So if you see in your privacy policy, in the vendor's privacy policy, something about contractors, ask what kind of contractors are being hired, what kinds of policies are they using, how frequent is that usage. Use model licenses. We have a few examples in our report of ones that have been used, and I know that other people, I know people on this call even are working on different additional model licenses that improve privacy. So I think that's really going to be a key, that you don't have to do all the hard work yourself, but ask for more than the standard privacy policy allows if you need to. Learn the ins and outs of your authentication system. So make sure you understand, is it is it IP, is it SAML, is it proxy server password, some combination. I think a lot of people are using a combination of all of those things. So make sure you understand which vendor uses which method, if there's something different than the standard and how it works, and make sure that you're really working with your tech people to get that set up in the correct way. And then I think one of the other things that we really emphasize in this document is that this really has to come from everyone in the library, from all departments and all levels. So the people who are working at the circulation desk, who might be telling people, oh, here's how you log into the system, they need to understand the privacy implications just as much as the person who's negotiating the licenses or the director of the library. and that they should all be at the table to design a privacy policy. That is, I feel like, the strongest way to make this happen is everyone needs to educate it. Everyone needs to be part of writing the policy. It needs to be, the values of the library need to be enacted in the policy. And that's hard work to do, but it's really worth it. It's the only way that any of this will actually go in reality. So, so thank you. So like I said, we are disbanding as a subgroup, but the work continues. I know a lot of people on this call are doing this work continuously. And I know a lot of people who have been involved with the group over the years are really happy to give you some advice if you have some specific questions, share more things that we found. And it was fun. I learned a lot from doing this because, like I said, I do not do e-resource negotiation, but I appreciated learning a lot about some of the ins and outs of this. So I think that does it for me.
All right, I believe I am up next. Hi, my name's Dorothea Salo, and I'm from the Information School at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And it was my honor to be one of the co-leaders of the subgroup that built the Research Ethics and Library Patron Data Glossary and Explainer. And I'm here to explain what that is about. So let me share my screen real quick. All right, good. It looks like that is being shared. So onward. First of all, who was involved in all this? I definitely want to give credit to all of the wonderful people who participated in this. You can see their names on this slide, with special thanks to Catherine Kim of DLF for shepherding it through the process. Why did we want to do this? A few different things. One is, of course, to raise awareness that research, there are quite a few researchers in quite a few contexts who, for one reason or another, are interested in using patron data in their research, both what I would call organization internal research and in more generalizable published research. And that shouldn't be happening without library awareness and input. I'm also hearing more and more about libraries and librarians feeling pressure to contribute data to various research projects. They're not always feeling comfortable with that, and they're kind of wondering, where's the ground that I stand on in this situation? Some traditional ethics help in research is not always going to be as helpful as we would want it to be. Sorry, checking the chat. All right, looks good. For example, if you are doing strictly internal research, you can't necessarily take that to the institutional review board because that's not necessarily within their scope. Another thing about IRBs is that their remit is strictly limited to harms that are happening to the specific subjects of the research, whereas obviously there are larger concerns involved in the privacy of library patron data. Whoop. Sorry, let me go back. The other reason we want to do this is that, oh gosh, there's an awful lot of jargon, statistics jargon, information security jargon, just jargon galore around all this stuff. And I certainly didn't know all of these terms going into this project. I certainly would never assume that every librarian has seen them before. So what we actually did. The explainer explains a few things. Why is this a concern now? What has it been a concern in the past? What's changed? What can go wrong when patron data is used in research projects? And third question, what else can I read to orient myself to all this? The glossary is kind of what it says on the tin: privacy-related terms, InfoSec terms, human subjects research terms, and statistics terms that come up frequently in this context. This is the question we don't answer, right? The glossary and explainer cannot tell you what to do. Honestly, we can't tell you what to do. We didn't try. What we hope we have done is create for you a tool that will help you, for whatever situation you're facing, answer that question yourself ethically and responsibly. We hope this helps. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me out of band. My email is salo, my last name, @wisc.edu. Thank you very much, and that's pretty much all I had to say. Thank you.
All right, thank you everyone, all the co-presenters. Thank you so much. Give me 1 second to get back to my slides. So just as a reminder, here's who you heard from today. Myself, Scott Young, Michelle, Yasmeen, Margaret, Paige, John, and Dorothea. Thank you so much to you for leading this work and joining us today, giving us your time and energy to share with this group the materials we've made. As an overview, again, here's what you heard about today. We covered a lot of ground. The advocacy action plan, the curriculum, risk assessment, vendor privacy policy analysis, and then the explainer. So this is kind of how our group is structured, our working group. We have these sub areas of focus. Here's other areas that our group covers: ed tech, technologies of surveillance, instruction, outreach, and advocacy, vendor-built systems, ethical service design, strategic engagement with administration, issues of data governance, and then, of course, collaborations with other groups working in this area. So if you want to get involved, if you have any questions or comments about these materials, we've got a few minutes today. We have about 8 minutes to the top of the hour. So we have the chat. We can unmute you if you'd like to ask a question. So anything that's on your mind? Yeah. What's on your mind? Any questions about what you heard today? Or any other thoughts from the co-presenters?
There's a lot of good chatter in the chat about privacy policies. So I think that's good to see lots of good resources people are sharing. So take a look at that if you haven't. There's a lot of good thoughts on there.
So thanks everybody for your questions. I just wanted to real quick touch on what Stephanie was talking about relative to security and privacy. I had the really excellent luck to have a close friendship with the person when I was at Arkansas who was basically the person who did all of our single sign-on work, and that was a person who was in IT and so was not in the libraries, although he had close friendships with a lot of people in the libraries. So yeah, I think that's an interesting point of view, and I would, sort of on a, sort of most basic level, say that it's always my strategy, if I can, to make friends with the security people because I know how much I can learn. It's also the truth that it's a good way for me to focus on what I'm good at, which is focusing on sort of the larger picture issues, sort of the discussion of why we should care, and rather not, sort of exactly how to make it happen. So I definitely understand that they can be conflated, particularly in people who are maybe not people who are in the libraries. And so that's definitely one of the points that we tried to think about a little bit with the advocacy document. The other thing I can say about this is that security teams do have checklists about questions that they ask before they implement any kind of new technology or any vendor-based thing. And I'm speaking in the context of academic libraries now. So if you do have the opportunity to work closely with your security team, sometimes you can even find out about their checklists and add the kinds of information or the kinds of strategies that you seek to promote into those checklists. And I think that's a point that's relevant to any kind of library that works with vendors. So thanks again so much for bringing that up.
And I just wanted to add, in my library, that we actually found after we wrote a privacy policy and presented it to our IT department, they actually invited us to join their information security committee had a library representative, because they sort of were thinking like, you know, they had one view of security and had not actually been thinking about the privacy side of it, other than sort of like being, you know, maintaining FERPA compliance. And so I think, but to sort of add more nuance to it or think about it more creatively, they realized the library actually had a lot of expertise to bring to their security. And so we work very closely with the security team at our campus now. It's a good opportunity.
That's great. And I just want to add, it's particularly if you're at an institution that does things like SAML or authentication or things like seamless access, it's very important because often those are in the control of central IT. And when we talked to them, they were more largely thinking about just making everything work as simply as possible, which in some cases meant sending out more information than we were comfortable with doing.
That does remind me of Dana Boyd's famous saying, public by default, private through effort. So we've got to put in the effort to help achieve the privacy we want to achieve. I want to amplify some of the things from the chat. Lots of good resources shared in the chat for vendor relations and privacy policy negotiations with vendors. So there's some resources from the Library Freedom Project that Allison shared. And also from Deborah Caldwell Stone at ALA. There's a privacy subcommittee being formed. And so contact her to get more information about that.
And I just want to say, like, all this stuff people are doing about, there's sort of mentioned about like aligning all of the privacy stuff with vendors and all the different work that all these different groups are doing. I think that is one of the reasons that the vendor built systems group decided there's so many other people doing such great work that we want to, you know, make sure that we can put our effort towards those other things that are going on. So that is good to see. I knew a lot of you would be on the call, and I'm glad to see you're sharing everything. And I'm happy to add. What I'd love if you could add comments to the document or send them to me, some specific groups to get involved with if people want to do the next steps. I would love to add those to that document.
Thanks, Margaret. So we have a question from Paige about the next steps for our working group, the Privacy and Ethics and Technology Working Group. So typically at this time of the year, our group would be engaged in smaller subgroups around thematic areas of interest. So I put this slide back up to show what those areas of interest could be. We've slowed that work down a little bit right now in light of our pandemic. Just wanting to give people, the members of our working group, a little more breathing room to adjust to work from home schedules or any other personal responsibilities they may have. So I think that Michelle and I will look to reach back out and possibly reconvene subgroups later in May, June, or even further down the road, just depending on where people are and what their capacities and interests are. So for anyone on this call, if you're interested in contributing work or ideas to any of these areas, just reach out to us, and we'll continue to convene small groups. Then the small groups, they work together to produce some of the materials like the ones you saw today. So it's a really great organization to be a part of, and our colleagues are really amazing and inspiring. So if you have any interest at all, just reach out. Here we are again. This is who you heard from today. So we'll just say thanks in closing. We're at the top of the hour. So thanks again, everyone, for being here today. Again, this session is recorded and will be shared on the DLF YouTube channel, so you can review it there and share it from there. Yeah, I'll just say thanks again and goodbye, and have a good day, everyone.